Now, you might think that my favorite thing about the new Porsche Macan EV would be its prodigious power and great handling. Or the fact that they made the backseat larger and now it can fit adults. Or even maybe this brand new, very cool Provence paint color. But it's none of those things. It's the fact that I had my phone on the wireless charger for about 30 minutes, and when I took it off, it didn't burn my hand.
What you talking about?
Now, this isn't our first time seeing the Macan EV. We actually did an unofficial range test with a prototype version of the car back in December, and we also got to see it in a studio in Germany, but this is actually our first time to get behind the wheel and to be able to tell you what we think about how it drives. Now, that seems like a lot of coverage. It's warranted because this is a really important vehicle for Porsche. Porsche sells a ton of Macans. The Macan actually accounts for more sales than the 911, Boxster, Cayman, and Panamera all combined last year. Now, the Macan EV, a slightly bigger vehicle than the Macan gas version. It's about 3 inches longer in the wheelbase, which really pays dividends when it comes to interior room and space. Now, if you want more in-depth information about the vehicle's interior or find the results of those range tests, be sure to check out the Edmunds channel for those. Very exciting. But today, I've traveled all the way to the south of France to find a climate very similar to that of what we have in Southern California, but also to finally get behind the wheel of this SUV that handles more like a hatchback, and as we already know, has great range and pretty impressive performance. We're starting things off today in the Macan Turbo. This is the more powerful of the two Macan electric variants, and it makes up to 630 horsepower. Now, that 630 horsepower is only available when you're using the launch control. When you're actually just driving it around, no matter what driving setting you're in, it makes a little less power, but trust me, it's still plenty of power for anything that you're going to need to do. Porsche quotes a 0 to 60 mile an hour time for this vehicle of just 3.1 seconds. And while we don't have it at the Edmunds test track yet from, the V-Box that I have internally, yeah, I think it definitely will hit that number, and probably with a little bit of room to spare. Now, for US versions of the Macan Electric, we're going to get the air suspension and the Porsche Active Suspension Management Standard. And today we've been driving around on a lot of really bumpy roads through these tiny French towns, and the suspension has really done great. When you're driving this thing at low speeds, even though it's got a turbo name attached to it and 22-inch wheels underneath me, it's still super comfortable. I've really enjoyed how it soaks up bumps, but I know that what you really want to know about the Macan Turbo is how it drives when we're pushing a little bit harder. So we're going to head up into the mountains right now and start to figure out what this thing can actually do. We've gotten out of the towns a little bit, and now we're into the mountains just above Nice, and this is where we can get the Macan Turbo to actually stretch its legs a little bit. The gas versions of the Macan were some of the best driving SUVs that you can buy anywhere. In a lot of ways, from behind the wheel, that vehicle felt more like a hot hatch than an SUV. And even though the Macan Electric, the versions, they're on a completely different platform, I think that they actually drive even better. Yes, this vehicle is heavier because you got the battery and all that stuff, but the big battery underneath me has really dropped the center of gravity, and Porsche has been able to make the weight distribution more ideal for spirited driving. The rear wheel steering, you can definitely feel it. It helps the back end of the car around these corners, and yeah, it feels incredibly agile. And then when you come out of a corner like this, with this being an EV, all that torque, instant power, so I can just put my foot down and just launch from corner to corner. One other thing about the Macan that I'm really enjoying is also the brakes. So the brake blend between the physical and the regenerative brakes is really well executed here. There's no real noticeable transitions between the two. And you might be worried with that extra weight that under hard braking that the nose might get a little squirrely, but not at all. This thing just feels rock solid under hard braking as well. One of the things I like to say about car companies is that they're kind of like people, and that is that you can really tell where they put their attention. And for Porsche, they've always put so much time, attention, and money into the driving experience so that when you are driving one of their vehicles, it feels the right way to them. And that's definitely true of the Macan Electric, and I'm so happy that it is, because we have so many sort of sterile driving EVs nowadays that when you can get behind the wheel of one that feels like it has some actual spirit and joy to it, something you really appreciate. One of the other features making its debut on electric versions of the Macan is a new head-up display. And that's normally a feature that I'm not super excited to test out, but in this case I am, and that's because this display is different from other ones in a few important ways. One of them is the way that it looks. So Porsche says that this display was designed to look like an 87-inch TV just over 30 feet away. Your eye doesn't actually have to refocus and readjust for you to be able to see it. So as you're driving down the road, you just kind of glance down to see it. Your eyes don't have to refocus. It just kind of feels like it's floating out there, but it makes it super clear and super easy to see, and it actually makes it easier to keep your eyes on the road. Another thing that I was very excited to try out with this system is that it has augmented reality features with the navigation. Augmented reality with navigation systems is not a feature that I really normally like. A lot of them involve the center screen here or this instrument cluster, but Porsche does all of those directions up here in the HUD. So as I'm driving, through a place that I don't really know well, France, and these tiny towns have all these little streets that don't really kind of make sense, I haven't really gotten lost today, and that's because I just followed the directions in the HUD that are tied to the native navigation. As you're approaching a turn, these little blue arrows will appear and they'll sort of guide you where you need to go. And there's a little display here in the instrument cluster that will sort of tell me what lane I need to be in. And it's just been a really seamless integration of the system, so much so that I noticed that I haven't really missed Google Maps. My default setting for pretty much every navigation system is I plug in my phone, I use Google Maps. But if I was ever driving in a place that I didn't know super well, I would actually prefer this setup because it seems like it's actively helping me to not get lost. And this is like probably the best augmented reality integration with navigation that I've seen, and I've really enjoyed it so far today. One of the difficult things about EV ownership has been route planning, especially for longer trips. Many of the auto manufacturers haven't done a great job with their native navigation of making it easy to input faraway destinations and find charging stations along the way and things like that. But Porsche, with the Macan and this new infotainment system, have really tried to simplify that process, and they've made it pretty speedy, just like the Macan Turbo. We are here in the south of France along the Mediterranean Sea, and let's say that we wanted to take a long road trip to the Porsche Museum in Stuttgart. Click that in, and as you can see, the route calculates pretty quickly, but the cool thing is that it will actually show me along the way which charging stations I need to stop at, and it will tell me their real-time charging information along the way. I can see that the 300 kilowatt stations, the ones that I would want to use with this vehicle, they are all available at this time, and they can even tell you when it was last updated as you're going along the way. And this is just a super smooth, really quick experience that's better than the one I found in other EVs from other manufacturers. Now, the Macan EV is also going to come with wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay Standard, and one more innovation that works very well with those two systems. So wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay notoriously really eat through your phone battery, and usually the wireless charging pad isn't powerful enough to, if you're running one of those things, add any power to the battery. Usually you're staying kind of consistent. But here in the Macan EV, they bumped up the power on this wireless charging pad all the way to 15 watts, and that is 3 times more powerful than the one in the Macan gas version. So it'll actually add power back to your phone even if you're using wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. And the other cool thing about this pad is that they put these rubber-like fins on the bottom and added a fan. So as your phone is on here, it's actually elevated just a little bit off the surface so it can still charge. But the cool thing is that when you take your phone out afterwards, it's not scalding hot. Now I have switched gears, or I guess since this is an EV, just switched vehicles, and now I'm behind the wheel of the Macan 4, which should be the volume model of the Macan Electric. Now I've driven these vehicles in what would kind of usually be the wrong order, because usually what happens on these drives is if you start in the high horsepower variant and then go down to the base model, you can feel a little bit underwhelmed. But here in the Macan Electric, that's not the case at all. I'm actually glad that I got to drive the Macan 4 second, because I really don't feel like I'm giving up a ton being behind the wheel of this one. Obviously, the Macan Turbo is the apex predator of this lineup. It's the one that you want to get if you want the absolute most power and performance. But here in the Macan 4, there's enough equipment and enough power that you're going to get like 90% of the same performance that you're going to get out of the turbo. And that's a pretty good proposition to me. You're going to miss out on that like little bit of edge that you would get in the turbo. But the thing is that on our drive, we never even got to touch the edge of the turbo's capability. It's not something that you can do legally pretty much on any street. You're gonna have to really go to a track to do that. And I don't think that most people who buy a Macan electric are going to end up taking it to the track. So functionally, this Macan 4 is going to be plenty of vehicle for everyone, self included. Especially when you look at the price difference between these two vehicles, the Macan 4 just makes the most sense. So this starts at under $80,000, though this being a Porsche, you're probably gonna have trouble finding one around that price. But to make the jump up to the Macan Turbo, that's gonna take you all the way to $105,000. And that's a pretty sizable gap. So that means that you could even add a handful of options, some of the very cool safety features, and still stay well under Macan Turbo prices. So the Macan 4 would really be my choice if it was my money that I was spending, and I think it's going to be the choice for most people as well. Now, really the only question remaining for this vehicle is going to be that EPA estimated range, and we have some insight into that from the unofficial range test that we did in the Macan Turbo at the end of last year. But that EPA estimated figure for both of these, Porsche says that won't be available until closer to the car's delivery date in the second half of 2024. Porsche says that when those deliveries start happening, that's when we'll get that estimated range figure. And of course, it's something that we're going to put to the test as soon as we can get a Macan EV into the Edmunds offices. And hopefully there we can also check its charging speed as well to see where it ends up on both our range and charging leaderboards. And if you want to check both of those out, head over to edmunds.com. The last thing that I really like about the Macan EV, and admittedly this is going to get super petty, is that the American version is actually going to have a lot more standard equipment than the European version. So in the US, we're going to get a panoramic sunroof, air suspension with adaptive dampers, and adaptive cruise control, all standard. Things you'll have to pay extra for here in Europe. And for us in the United States, we're usually envying European cars, the script might actually get flipped for once. So what Porsche has done with the Macan EV is basically improve on the gas version in pretty much every way. And I think that taking your best-selling vehicle and making it even better, that's a pretty good recipe for success. Thanks for watching.